This is the Sports and Society podcast, where we go beyond scores, statistics, and personalities to focus on issues and controversies in sports worlds. Your hosts, Jake Oakley and Jeff Montes de Oca, are sports sociologists and the authors of the book, Sports and Society, Issues and Controversies. The episodes in this podcast give you a behind-the-scenes look at the textbook with stories from our lives as scholars and athletes, as well as providing analysis of ongoing issues and controversies in contemporary sport worlds. We welcome hearing your thoughts and analysis, so please use this space to engage with us about the textbook or any of the topics we cover in this podcast. Hello and welcome to the Sports and Society podcast. Your hosts are Jay Oakley and Jeff Montes de Oca. Hey, Jay.
Hey. Good to be with you, Jeff, and with our guest today. This will be fun.
So the last few years has seen rapid and dramatic changes in the landscape of collegiate sports. The news has been filled with stories about NIL, player salaries, conference realignments, and gambling. Most of this is focused on the highest levels, but those changes are going to impact not just the bowl subdivision, but all levels of collegiate sports, and then by necessity, high school sports as well. We are speaking with two extraordinary scholars who can help us make sense of the new realities in collegiate sports. I'm thrilled to introduce our guests, Drs. Keith Harrison and Brandon Martin. Dr. C. Keith Harrison founded the nonprofit Scholar Baller that develops culturally relevant educational and incentive-based programs at the middle school, high school, and college levels to help bridge the gap between education, sport, and popular culture. And he is currently a professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Dr. Brandon E. Martin is the director of athletics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the executive in residence at the UMKC Henry W. Block School of Management. And there he designs and develops non-degree to strategic leadership programs for sport industry executives and professionals in the region. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is absolutely our pleasure to have you here. So we always like to start with the same two questions for all of our guests. And I'll ask, each of you the first question, and then we'll get to the second. So let's start off by, if you could just briefly describe your experience in sports.
Dr. Harrison, you want to go first?
I'll go age before beauty, sure. Hello, everyone out there. I'll try to be concise, not a strength of mine, but I grew up in Southern California in the neighborhood Gardena, nestled between Compton and LA. And, during that period, we played out in the streets till the lights came on. So whatever season it was, you played that sport. And then the fast forward, my dad coached me youth basketball at Rosecrans Park, which the dots connect. The person that ran the park is tight with Dr. Martin's father and some other peers. It comes full circle. And so, one of the things, my fondest memories of youth sport is Rosecrans Park, nestled on the border of Compton, Gardena, and Los Angeles. And the reason is it's in the 70s when many African-American families had two-parent homes. The best burgers I had on earth were at Rosecrans Park because all the African-American mothers worked in the snack bar. All the dads coached their sons. So, lots of great memories, music and sport. We came out, they introduced the Little League teams, and then it just trickled up from high school to California, Cerritos College, to West Texas A&M, a D2 person. And then I coached 5 years while I worked on my master's and doctorate, and eventually met Dr. Coakley and eventually Doc Jeff at the NAS meeting. So sport was always, it brought our families together, but it brought our communities together.
Yeah, so just to dovetail off of Dr. Harrison's point, so I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles. So, Dr. Harrison brought up Rosecrans Park. So I grew up in Jesse Owens Park. So it's a historic park, and that's where I cut my teeth. That's where I gained my identity. That's where I earned my stripes as an athlete and as a Black man in my neighborhood. My experience in sports is all about moments. And so my father took every dime he had, which, this was in the 80s. It was $300 to send me to John Wooden's basketball camp. And it was the first time. I was 9 years old, and I was away for a week. It was in Santa Barbara. And that's where I learned the fundamentals of basketball. That's why I learned that this was something that I wanted to do from a competitive standpoint. But basketball at that point became the vehicle for me to have access. So my father, me being a first generation college student, my father worked for the LA Times for 28 years in transportation. And he drove down the 110 freeway and he saw USC. And he didn't really truly understand what he was doing, but he was manifesting me attending USC by doing that. And it just so happened that I was recruited by George Raveling, who was a coach at USC at that time, and I grew up 12 minutes away from USC. So what resulted in a college basketball scholarship at USC was transformational for me, being 12 minutes away from a world-class institution. Being a freshman, not truly understanding the value of what that meant, I felt I had an obligation to my father, felt like I had an obligation to those who came before me in Jesse Owens Park to not only embark on the journey at USC, but to thrive and to be successful. And so that's what I did, aside from being on the dean's list for 5 semesters, aside from being a 3-time captain at USC and being able to play professional sports internationally in Spain, Venezuela, China, really gave me a roadmap for the world. And what I experienced was a rebirth and a greater appreciation for being in the United States and just the true value of that. And it really gave me a springboard into professional life.
Yeah, and I'll make this quick just to circle around Doc Martin and I. Is in 1978, I learned 2 things. I learned that a side hustle was important, which would impact me later. So my mother had a full-time job at the Public Utilities Commission, but she would leave me in the car sometimes to go have Rubbermaid parties. And I sit in the car and listen to, music. But she sent me to John Wooden's camp in 78 in La Jolla from her revenue from Rubbermaid parties in Compton and Gardena. So I have a great picture with John Wooden. So thanks, Doc Martin, for refreshing that. Wooden camp, that was back when there weren't hardly any camps.
Yeah, great point, Dr. Harrison. And, just to dovetail quickly off of the Rubbermaid example that Dr. Harrison provided, Rubbermaid was a way for, namely, Black folks in the community to make additional funds. But at the core of it was all about really coming together and in a social setting and collaborating, but also having solutions for success in the community. And so Rubbermaid was a critical piece of identity development and how Dr. Harrison and I were socialized as we had to go through this rites of passage in the community.
Dr. Martin, you've already anticipated our next question, and so I'm going to ask it and have you just talk more specifically about how this experience in sports that you've just been describing informs your scholarship and the work that you're currently doing.
Yeah. Jeff, I appreciate the question. So, going back to USC, I talked about access and opportunity, and what I found was this hidden treasure of people, culture, capital, and a blueprint to move forward while I was at USC, but also afterwards. And so one of my goals, Jeff, was always how can I leave an indelible mark on the world, especially being a Black man in this country. And I've always aspired to be more than just an athlete. I've always aspired to be a person who could excel academically, but really prioritize holistic development, because I knew that holistic development was something that I wanted to teach, something that I wanted to share, something that I wanted to model moving forward. And as we think about my experiences, even from the first graduate level class that I taught when I was at USC years ago, it was all about service. It's rooted in service, but it was rooted in how can I do things that have never really been done before from a student athlete level. And having people like Dr. Harrison in my life to show me a blueprint and to show me how to use his terminology, to be a true scholar baller. As a Swiss Army knife, for lack of a better word, of not just being an athletic administrator, not just being an adjunct professor, but to be a person who can be a true higher education professional that could serve in multiple capacities, multiple roles, and be able to walk into any room on a college or university campus and be able to speak that language.
I really appreciate both of you. And you've already started answering this question too, Dr. Harrison, because it's so clear that your life trajectory, which sport is such an important part of, is all connected, and you're constantly reflecting upon your own trajectories and how you're connecting these different parts of your lives. But please, Dr. Harrison, can you explain a little bit more specifically for yourself?
Yes. I mean, just two moments, and they're both things that, we're involved in. It was mind-blowing to me in May of 1995, as I was finishing up my doctorate. A buddy of mine, Doug Nelson, who's now a pastor, and he played at Oregon State, and he's from the Inglewood area. He went to St. Bernard. I think Dr. Martin knows who he is as well. But Doug said, hey man, hey bruh, Anita DeFrance told me the sport history groups coming to the Queen Mary, this and that, and do you want to come? And that's a whole nother story. But I mean, it was mind blowing to meet people that got paid full time to teach and learn sport. Then it gets even better, and you all know where this is headed. So then I go to NASS in 1995, and I meet Dr. Coakley and others, and I'm like, okay, these were more historians. Now these folks sociologically, what you do, Dr. Montez, I was like, this is a thing? I can get paid with benefits to do this? And then all the people I had cited were in the room. So it was Sabo and Messner. And then one of my favorite moments, Barry Tatum's book, Dr. Tatum's book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together? This is back when they call it, they still call it family, but I'm standing by all the African-American scholars of sport, Dr. Dana Brooks, Smith, Tina Sloan Green, others. And I had a lunch plan with Dr. Coakley. And we were in Sacramento. He takes me to lunch, and I never forgot two things he told me. He said, things are going to be bright for me. I'd have to work hard, but I have access to African-American student athletes. I played. And these are things that would trickle later, to Dr. Martin and others, because when I was at SC, I was in the higher ed part. And of course, I would meet sociologists like Messner later, but no one in higher ed other than John Thielen and Tuck Toma were doing higher ed in sports. So for me, colleagues, I had to put the pieces together, which is something I still continue to do. I still don't know how I ended up getting tenure in a college of business and becoming a full professor. Let me rephrase. I don't know how I ended up in a college of business, and I do entrepreneurship. And then I'll end the sentence by saying this. I've never had a class on sport or sociology, but I'm known as a sports sociologist by many. So I don't know if I answered that.
Well, funny point. I've never taken a class on sports sociology, even though I was one of Mike Messner's students. He didn't offer it when I was there, but I have taught it many times. And now I'm the co-writer on the textbook on sports sociology. So that's pretty exciting. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I'll just add to that and say that I never took a course on the sociology of sport either. And at the University of Notre Dame, when I wanted to do my dissertation on how sport affected campus life, my advisor told me to do something serious. And as it turned out, I ended up doing a dissertation on Black Catholic priests at a time when their identity as a priest and their identity as Black men was in conflict and created all sorts of tension in their lives. And it was a fun dissertation to do, interviewing those men. But the whole notion of studying sport, even at the University of Notre Dame, was just out of bounds.
That this is a whole episode in and of itself, a separate episode. So, but let's get into the specific topic of the collegiate sports landscape right now, which again, it's changing incredibly fast, and those changes are monumental. Before we get into the specifics of the change, I'd like each of you, Drs. Harrison and Martin, to talk about, one, how do you keep up with it all? And I know that's your job, so that's what you do. And maybe even more so for students that are listening, how should they be keeping up with all of these changes and making sense of it?
Yes, I'll go first, but I'm going to throw a serious lob to Doc Martin. I mean, he lives it every day. He's a scholar practitioner. I'm going to start out critical. That's what we are, critical scholars. If the college presidents, notice I said that before the NCAA, it just listened to many of us and set up an educational incentive system for college athletes, whether you want to call them student athletes, whatever you want, and had an incentive if you matriculate and graduate, and this is before all the rule changes, we could be in a better situation. But what I've learned after 57 years on this earth as an American citizen is that pendulums swing extremely. So we go to this hypocrisy and all these different things about college athletics and higher ed, and we go from one extreme to the other. And we have the Drake group who's involved with the House settlement and all these things. So I'm going to throw out a question, and then I'm going to end these particular remarks and throw it back to Doc Martin. Is I've always been critical and asked many of our colleagues who just wanted to pay athletes or get rid of the hypocrisy. And I always ask, how is that going to educate more human beings to get rid of the hypocrisy, and specifically Black men in revenue sports? So I'm all for athletes having agency. I just right now it's disruptive and chaotic. And I'm not sure, how many are going to make the transition. I'm not sure what we're going to create now with this model. And so, yes, I'm following it. My godson left today for Cal Berkeley. I mean, he's a straight A student, 17 offers, every Ivy League school, and we're all petrified at what could happen.
Yeah, that's amazing that we're entering a realm now about which little is known. And Keith, I think that you're being prophetic here, because it may lead to an increasing emphasis on the athletic identity, and some young men and women are going to ignore some of the tension between the athletic and scholarly identities and just side with the athletic because there's opportunities there, at least short-term opportunities. So, and we'll talk more about that, but I certainly want to hear Doc Martin, in his role as an athletic director, how he's approaching this.
Yeah, Dr. Coakley, I appreciate that, and certainly empathize and understand Dr. Harrison's comments and sentiments, especially as relates to his nephew going through this process, as my daughter has started the process as of Sunday in volleyball. We've dealt with 2 to 3 years where we had more questions than answers. And so it's been a fluid, chaotic, anxiety-provoking type of position that has put people like myself in. And as we talk about our conversations that we have with our coaches, with our student athletes, the stakeholders and donors, and even my boss, the chancellor, Summit League representatives, we talk about the house element. We talk about NIL. And to me, I think we have entered into a lot of pseudo solutions to a more larger issue. All right. So of course the house settlement has been passed, and now each athletic department and institution can figure out if they want to opt in or opt out of the settlement. It appears to be, when you look at the fine print and some of the mandates by the NC2A, that I think a large majority of Division I schools will opt in to the settlement. But that comes with a cost. And the cost is that you have to consider the roster limits that you have. You have to consider the sports that you sponsor. And as we enter, nobody wants to talk about this professionalized model that we've entered into academia. You have to figure out the position of where you want the sports, where you're most competitive, and you have to figure out how most you want to invest in those sports. Now, the issues still remain. Gender equity. Okay. Well, how do you do that? Are there going to be more lawsuits that are henceforth with that? Maybe. Don't know. But I want to go back to a quote by Mike Tomlin, the legendary coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he talked about how we can't make excuses for our circumstances. So that's one of the things that I tell my staff. This is not a doom and gloom. This is more of an opportunity. Where I sit, this is an opportunity for the Kansas City community, for the campus community, to truly put 2 feet into the elevation of athletics and to socialize it and present it and educate folks on campus properly on how athletics can truly be a great marketing tool for the university. To the point about student athletes and the position that it puts them in, well, there's a question of, are we truly concerned about academic excellence at this point? I've been in several rooms. I serve on probably too many committees where there's not many conversations that discuss, well, how do we take this student athlete or this group of student athletes and make them scholar ballers, to use Dr. Harrison's term. It's more about, well, how do we figure out ways to pay them more money? Now, The identity piece, Dr. Coakley, that you mentioned, the athletic identity, I think that ship has already sailed. So in the recruiting process, it's not about, well, I want to major in this, or I want to be attached to this business school. It's about, well, what does the NIL package look like? Right? But the NIL package in 2025, how does that make you a better person when 5 years from now, 15 years from now? I'm not sure if that really is the right solution. So I want you all to think about this. We are at respective colleges and universities, and we have student athletes who come in, and we broker NIL deals with these student athletes. And it's like this subculture that we have in athletics that does not match the true tenets of higher education. So to some degree, it can be defined as a contradiction. Okay. But this is the true reality. And in my position, I have to exemplify adaptive leadership right now. And I have to find a way to have that student athlete who has signed an NIL deal and open up their eyes to how they can truly be developed in the time that we have them, because just because they sign an NIL deal today doesn't mean we're going to have them next year because it's transfer, right? So how do I take that student athlete and maximize the time that I have with that student athlete, and get them to see more of the macro picture of when they're 30, 40, 50 years old, and get them to make the right choices and decisions that they need to make down the road. These are conversations that are not being had at my level.
Yeah, and let me just say that Dr. Harrison and I and a couple of other colleagues have written a paper on this, and our idea was that there should be a special advisor, an academic advisor related to NIL and NIL deals, so that the athletes will be able to take advantage of the happenstance opportunities that they have as they sign a deal, as they meet people in terms of doing the deal, doing endorsements, doing public speaking, doing other kinds of things, and develop the relationships that will help them as they move towards graduation and after graduation, so that they have a ready-made fund of social capital that will help them move into the rest of their lives in a meaningful and satisfying way. And I don't know if any universities are doing that. Is Dr. Martin, it sounds like you're doing that as an individual, but I'd like to see a formal organization within universities that help the athletes do that, especially athletes who are coming from backgrounds where they lack that kind of social capital, the hookups that, my friends, black friends at the Paul Settlement House way back said, I'm looking for a hookup. And what that meant was, I'm looking for something outside of my confined and resource poor neighborhood, so that I can move into other spheres that are going to help me in the future. And that kind of transition, could be facilitated through NIL. And I'm just wondering how many places are doing that.
Dr. Coakley, I appreciate, and you're right on. There are some universities, some athletic departments who do have that chief person who is that advisor. On a more macro level, the issue is that there's too many cooks in the kitchen. So even if you do have that advisor, and if we look at this athletic situation or dilemma from a K through 16 level, There is another advisor from that community that you referenced. There's a parent involved or parents involved. There's other people within the circle who have influence on that student athlete that might neutralize that advisor. Okay. I come to University X, coach or the athletic director says, you need to meet with that advisor. I don't know him or her. I don't know this person, but I do know the people in my circle. So now it becomes a lot more complex. Who is the champion within that circle? Who has the most influence? Right? And people like myself who put enormous pressure on coaches to win, especially in this new landscape. The coach sometimes is handcuffed on how he or she can influence that student athlete to listen to that advisor. Okay. So it becomes very complicated throughout the recruiting process to understand who's really driving the ship. The kid shows up, but the person driving the ship might be 2,000 miles away. So the sooner you figure out who that champion is and who's driving the ship, the faster you can accelerate that learning process and that advising process that you referenced, Dr. Pope.
I was wondering if you could, Dr. Martin, talk about, in particular, the experience that these students are having. I mean, I was a grad student at USC in the Pete Carroll era and worked in the Student Athletic Center for a while, and that was eye-opening for me. And one of the things, and so I mostly worked, being a sociologist, I mostly worked with football players because so many of the USC football players major in sociology, and they're so important to the revenues and the prestige of that school. And they had very mixed experiences at that time. So I'm wondering now, with all of these changes, all of, as you said, you got a student this year, but they might not be there next year. What are these changes like? How are they impacting these kids?
Well, let's just start out by saying that we've created a system where student athletes can be labeled as opportunists. So they can be at one place for 1 year and then they get another opportunity the next year. And no one is talking about the 4-year degree. No one is talking about how you are successful at one university. How it used to be you referenced back in the Pete Carroll days, and I was actually an administrator there under Mike Garrett for 10 years. It used to be you stay somewhere 4 years, you get to know the faculty, you get to know the coaches, you get to know your your teammates on a much deeper level. You have a true loyalty to a university. And that's when we talk about alumni, right? That's what it is about. Well, when you have student athletes that transfer to 3 different schools, where's their allegiance? How do they understand how to cope and deal with adversity? How do they learn about career development? Whose job is that to teach them about career? How can we expose them to people like yourself? How can we expose them and say, hey, you can be a professor one day? Whose job is that? And how much time do we have? And the distraction of the ego-driven type of approach of, well, I got paid X amount of dollars. Well, that student athlete might not want to really talk about their future 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so one of the challenges that is not talked about largely is the limited amount of time that we have with these student athletes. Jeff, you referenced the experiences. Well, student athletes are given a blueprint on, hey, this is what you're going to do every day. And in most cases, there's not enough time for them to gain, and this goes back to your point, Dr. Coakley, about identity, to gain that true academic identity on the college campus. to really forge those relationships with faculty that we to forge those relationships with alumni that we would like. And so I think this is a time where we're trying to figure out, what does student athlete development look like, and how can we be successful with those student athletes?
Both of you started out talking about how transformative Division I athletics were for you, and you're both in Southern California. That this was having access to university and great universities through your athletics was transformative and created the opportunities for you to be in the positions you currently are in. One of the things I'm hearing from you, though, as you're talking, is these changes that we are seeing are increasing the commercialization of collegiate athletics and potentially opening up the students for greater levels of exploitation. And that was something I did see, is that, I remember I was tutoring a couple of the linemen. They actually were center, guard, tackle. It's kind of funny. One of the things they talked about was when they were in high school, football was all about fun. Now they're at USC, it's a job that they've been bought and paid for, and it's not really fun anymore. And they didn't have the language of, this is exploitive, but it seems like what you're describing is the students can be open to even more levels of exploitation. What does that mean for the kinds of transformative experiences you had? Is that still available to the students now?
Let's talk about some academic advisors when we catch student athletes doing something, air quotes, good. Bryce Young played with my good friend Brian Hunter's son at my famous high school, Modern Day High School in Orange County, Santa Ana. Bryce Young got his degree in 3 years, won the Heisman. Travis Hunter, 4.0. I could go on and on. That another identity that's healthy is happening. But to Dr. Martin's point, the structure is not going to massively disseminate a scholar baller identity. They're out there, and more on the women's side, okay, for different structural reasons. And quite frankly, the women just kick butt, to give them credit. But yeah, it's the genie's out. It's out of the bottle now, and yeah, here's what I was thinking about. One of my favorite human beings is Jalen Hurts, and I was at the national championship game when, I think he lost like 2 games as a starter or something. It's 3 years at Alabama, but I'm walking home and Alabama fans are, he can't play quarterback. This is when Tua came in, exactly, Dr. Montez there. Okay. And it's just the most racially layered. And I'm like, Clemson barely won the game. The dude had gone, this was his freshman year. So we know, you fast forward, Jalen Hurts got his degree from Alabama, got a master's in organizational leadership, design, and other and human resources from OU. But here's what I kind of chuckle. So he got introduced, I think, on Monday Night Football, and he said, "Roll, Sooners." And so now, to Doc Martin's point in our discussion, where are they going to even go back as an alumnus in a male or alumni? Like now on TV, when you listen, they say, that's a such and such transfer. They don't even say like just who they are. If you watch a high school game, Dr. Coakley and many others, you included, Doc Montez, have written about this. Like, we don't even have an amateur model. They say that's a Clemson commit. That's a Cal Berkeley commit. So where do we have the development of human beings if they're always chasing the bag. And here's the point I want to make with generational diversity. This is an issue. Right now in higher ed, if we allow students in our classes and say in 16 weeks or a quarter 10 weeks, you can transfer sections anytime you want, it would be worse than the portal. It's not about sport. We've lit, and the data's out there. You can Google, we've lit, and I'm going to be hypercritical, we've lit the most vulnerable generation ever with what the marketing literature calls preferred alternative choice, PAC, have all these choices. And I'm not saying I don't want them to have choices, colleagues. I'm saying it would be worse if we allowed it. Can you imagine? I don't like that professor. I'm going to transfer. It'd be a mess. So I wanted to throw that out there because people want to make the portal about athletic identity when it's really about hyper decisions.
Yeah, Keith. And, you know, if there was ever a time for scholar baller, it is right now in a way. And I know you've been doing this for years and years. And I guess I'm going to give you a personal question. After you've done this, and in light of what you know right now, what is your advice to your nephew? And how should parents look at this situation? You know, you say you're a quasi-parent here, but so tell us about what this parent ought to be thinking.
Well, I lean on Dr. Martin and others, but I will personalize it right now. And thank you, Doc Martin, for encouraging me to make sure I got to his prom send-off, which is another lecture for another time, the economics beyond prom send-off. I'm from an area where not good or bad. They just took a picture of you with your date that evening in the front lawn, and you sent you off if you had the money for a limo. But now it's become a spectacle. But that's another discussion. So I'm gonna first go with Scholar Baller, then what I told Trey here. Scholar Baller right now, we do limited partnerships, and this is something I learned through trial and error myself, Gene Boyd and Cliff, Scott Buckstein, and others. Is there's too much turnover. It had to be a relationship like Dr. Martin and people I'm real close to even implement it, because the turnover is out of control. When we started it 25, 30 years ago, there was some continuity. People didn't transfer the way they used to. The way they do now. So all we can do is try to, we just have limited partnerships. Now, what did I tell Trey? We were at the bowl game with Cal and UNLV, and part of his holiday Christmas gift, he and his mother, Athena, I bought tickets. I'd never been in SoFi. Let me just say, from a sociology or sport perspective, it's one of the greatest nights of my life. Ran into Dr. Eddie Como and his son. People say bowl games don't matter. They matter. Doc Martin, I saw people from the community that we both know. Yeah, it's just UNLV, 9-3, Cal 6-6. So here's what I told him. I put my arm around him and I said, hey, man, stay out of the portal until you get your degree at Cal. I said, because we don't know what's going to happen. It's most likely going to be a hot mess. I said, please listen to your uncle and godfather. So the good news is we have a plan in place. If something happens with the coach, and I'm just being transparent, I know the general manager. You can Google who it is. I have to plan for if they have a coaching change. Well, the GM's Ron Rivera. I know Ron from the NFL research and seeing him at symposium events like the one I just got back from. You have to be selfish a little bit. We don't even care if he ever plays it down, if they'll fund him and he can go to and do his school. He wants to redshirt because he wants to get his degree. and get a grad degree or two while he's there. So all you can try to do is leverage the academics, but I would say as a junior college person, I'll stop here. I used to think 2 years was interesting as a JC person, community college. Now, like, my mentality is anything I'm dealing with college athletics, they're gonna be gone in a year. I'm teaching a class at UCLA this summer, part of my new employment as a lecturer, and I mean, it's student athletes that are just there for a year. And so I just think we've created a very transactional academic and athletic experience, to Doc Coakley, your question. And, I'm going to say this. I don't know what we should do at times.
I think it's so hard to figure out this landscape, particularly as things are changing, and they're going to continue to change, as you've both already indicated, for the foreseeable future. Dr. Martin, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I see it being a very challenging, complicated situation for people like myself, who have to think about revenue every day. So years ago, to Dr. Harrison's point, we could devise models, systems, we can have continuity with student athletes, we can invest funding into student athlete academic performance, student athlete development. But now you have to think about this more on a macro level. There's so many stakeholders who are involved in this process. You have the board of trustees, you have presidents, chancellors, you have people who sit in my seat. And in this new landscape, it's all about fresh revenue streams. And so with that, understanding that you have the transfer portal, how much is a university willing to invest in a student athlete that may or may not be there next year? So I want to go back to the K through 16 model. This has to be a individualized approach for a student athlete who is entering into a partnership, and I'm going to say a partnership with the athletic department, a partnership with the university, that he or she learned back in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Because that that academic identity was developed, within that circle that I have referenced. And as Dr. Harrison talked about his nephew, and now I have a 16-year-old daughter who is entering her junior year being recruited by universities. It starts in the home. It starts with the two parents. And now that's more, some would say that's a more archaic model. It's old school. It's all of that, but it starts with the two parents in the home. And when she has conversations with these universities, with these respective coaches, she is representing the Martin family, first and foremost. And my guidance and counsel to her has always been that you have to choose a university that is going to make you a better person, a more prosperous person, a more connected person, not only to the university, but to the world when you are 30, 40, 50 years old. This is not just a 1-year college choice decision. And so I've started that process. She hasn't selected a university to date. So we'll see how, good my counsel is to her moving forward. But I just firmly believe that as complicated as it is, it starts in the home.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the things I'm also curious, I should say we're also curious about, is because so much of this discussion and focus is at that football subdivision level, right? The football bowl subdivision level. But how is this going to impact below that level, the Division II level, the Division III level, and maybe this is a separate question to talk about how it's going to impact high schools, because the high schools obviously are linked to collegiate athletics in so many different ways.
Well, Jeff, I'll talk about my level first, and in the football, I'm going to defer to Dr. Harrison on that, and I can comment for high school level. My level, which is the D1 AAA level, non-football, how it's going to impact us is again, I talked about identifying fresh revenue streams. How can we go deeper with the student athletes while we have them? How can I have realistic expectations of coaches in this new landscape, given that they're developing teams, not programs? It's also a way to, you have to inform, educate, and politicize the dynamics that are going on with board of trustees, with the influencers within the Kansas City community. So it's made my job that much more difficult and challenging. But again, as I mentioned, a quote by Coach Tomlin, I still believe that we're sitting on acres of diamonds here in Kansas City, and that we are far from reaching our potential. So I still see opportunity in that. To your question about high school, it's going to impact the high school level because there's going to be less high school players who are. The transfer portal is going to be a primary means for coaches to get more experienced, seasoned student athletes that can help them win now. So as before, where coaches sign whatever multi-year contract that they sign, it's all about how can you win right now? And that pressure goes from the coach to myself, to my boss, all the way up. And there are some coaches who feel like high school student athletes can't help them do that. And so that's the impact on high school student athletes that I see from my seat.
And I'll just hit football. One, we don't want to forget about community colleges and junior colleges. There are about 70 in California with football teams and only 65 in the rest of the United States. I just had a phone call earlier. Here's the thing. Let's talk about sport management or students that want to work in sport. They overlook the two levels that need it the most, high school and community college. Always tell them you should try to get external funding and set up your own player development, player engagement, educational empowerment things at that level. That's another lecture. So I do want to make a comment at the high school level, though. I think you're going to see they're gearing up a national championship. If you look at games on TV, it's all increased. So they're going to have some of the same issues. Football-wise, what will happen is the D2s that have alumni and donors with bank, cheddar, cheese, money, it'll be skewed. So they'll get NIL deals for them. It won't be at the magnitude, to Dr. Jeff's question, of FBS, but it's all going to trickle down. One of the things we haven't talked about, we've mentioned their name, is the level of unrealistic accountability of coaches. I'm going to get on coach's side right now, and let's start pro. Thibodeau fired. I could go on, Dr. Other names. I mean, you've seen people get fired who have won, who have not won enough. I don't think everyone, I'm going to be a little bit on a tangent, realizes how bad certain things in the landscape. I won't name the schools. I've had, and this is interesting, these are corporate partners who know coaches, who have partnerships with intercollegiate athletics. There's players at halftime asking the coach, what's up with their NIL deal? What are they going to get next year? While coaches are trying to make halftime adjustments. I'm not joking. So everyone doesn't really understand the level of greed. I'm a Pac-12 person. I am so upset about the realignment. Am I good friends with the commissioner, Teresa Gould? Absolutely. But it just, things are done now. It's about the money. It was funny with Stanford and Cal, people were like, well, where are they going to end up? I said, I can tell you where their faculty will not end up is in the Mountain West or Big West. I said, if they could be an Ivy League, they would, but from a competitive standpoint across sports athletically, they weren't going to do it. So I knew they were going to end up in ACC because we all know in this call, faculty they take their NIH grants and they go somewhere else. So we have it's going to trickle down, but once again, academics are going to get curbed. Community colleges are always left out, and but it is a lot of opportunity. As Dr. Pamela Walker, administrator, told me many years ago, Keith, there'll be a lot of opportunity for you to do a lot of good work because there's a lot of challenges.
One of the other things I just keep thinking about, and I don't know if this is just a crazy idea, and you two could answer this better than I can, but I keep thinking about the 1940s and 1950s, which was also a time of very rapid change, right? I mean, in the 1940s, the student athlete was invented, right? As scholarships became a thing. Television emerges, and it's transformational of collegiate football. One of the reactions to those changes and the increasing commercialization at that time was the invention of the Ivy League as a conference that intentionally de-emphasized sport, because the schools, Harvard and Yale, that invented football, they couldn't compete with the Michigans, the Notre Dames, the Berkeleys, right? All of the USC, all of those schools. Can you imagine not necessarily a new Ivy League emerging, but potentially schools wanting to actually de-emphasize the competition? And that it was so brilliant of the Ivy League because they could lower their costs and still have competitive, exciting football games that alumni would want to show up to, and then, of course, donate to those schools. Do you imagine anything of that sort of nature on the horizon?
Jeff, I appreciate the question. What I see is some colleges and universities choosing not to be in the athletics game because they can't. So, and it's going to be a political decision, but there's going to be some people who say, okay, well, it's going to cost me X amount for additional scholarships. It's going to cost me X amount for NIL. Well, I'm already in the bottom third of my conference. Well, what's the cost benefit analysis of us having athletics? And some people are going to jump off that ship. And so I think we are far beyond not looking at the scoreboard as a means of success and not looking at how many butts we have in seats as a means for success. Far beyond looking at the spreadsheet for revenue on how many sponsorships we have, how many alumni we have engaged, looking at our annual fund of how many donors we have involved. I think we're far beyond that. We are in a hyper-professionalized business framework now. And we can point the finger at, who started this and the whole genesis of how we got into this issue. But, we can't spend a lot of time on that. Right now, we have to find solutions to it. And that's where I sit on.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in, doctors. I'm gonna be super positive and hopeful, and let's look at the framework of intersectionality. to Dr. Jeff's great question. They used to say, you can't put Black Americans on television. Then the Jeffersons, I'm old enough to remember, they'd move it from slot to slot, still number one. Worst number two. Years ago, we said, and Dr. Danielle McCardle told me to tell everyone hello. She starts at Georgia. Her dissertation is on the role identity of women's sports and how to escalate it. People said people will never consume women's sports. I got her a hat for her PhD graduation. It says, Final Four, NCAA. It doesn't say women's Final Four. And she predicted this. So when you think about that, Doc Martin and I have grown up, as Doc Jeff has too, on hip hop. We're the MTV era. It wasn't the number one music in the world. It is now, the last 7 years. So my point is, I agree with Dr. Martin, but I also think there's always something that we don't see, a movement, and it could happen. As long as it's funded and someone invests, that model could happen. But yeah, when I think about different changes over time, I think there's going to be another music genre, not even here, that's going to overtake hip hop. I don't think the four of us will be around to see it, but if you had said rock and roll would be overtaken by hip hop when I was even in high school, and my 40-year reunion's coming up this fall and I'm the chair of it, I would have said, you need your head examined. So some things will happen. I want to leave with this comment on this topic. I think we still need to, for lack of a better word, convince college athletes and student athletes that sport and athletics, the participation, it's not the best thing on earth. There's other things that are going on that are cool, that are more important, that, my message to the students and the student athletes at UCLA in this course is going to be, you can transfer those skills and do many other things and have a fulfilling life, and revenue may or may not come. Right now, we've really got to peel away at, it's all about sport. Parents, Doc Coakley's work, are mortgaging their homes, and everyone's just diving in all on sport. Or this other trend that's even worse in my view is, I'm going to be a YouTuber. I'm going to be an influencer, when they have a better chance of actually being Bron in sport, LeBron James, than even being a YouTuber, and those aren't great odds. So we just have we've really taken about 2 15-yard personal fouls with a targeting call with delayed gratification.
So I want to jump in on that, Dr. Harrison. So what we have is social media. The rise of social media has, they've become the parents. They've become the chief advisor. The issue with that is that everything we know is sensationalized on social media. It's not so much reality. So we have young people, and I've emphasized this on our time today, about the K through 16 level, right? So we have 6th, 7th, 8th graders who are on social media, who they have these aspirations to be a person who might not be that person, but they see it, they see images of it, but might not be that person. And so I think that's problematic. And I want to just dovetail a little bit more on your question, Jeff, and a little bit what Dr. Harrison shared about. Dr. Harrison is, he's the true optimist, for sure, about the future. One thing I would say to that is it's going to be very difficult with the impact of television in our industry to truly have the impact that I think we all want on this call, because we're talking about the decision makers who have built generational wealth off of these television contracts that don't have anything to do with student athlete X developing as a student and as a person. So we've now come to terms with the model that inevitably has been created. And we have to come to terms with the fact that the way that we feed our families is a lot different today than it was even 5-10 years ago. Now, nobody wants to talk about that. Okay. You're going to read a lot of quotes from people who sit in my seat that's going to say things different. But the bottom line is that we're in a whole different ball game right now. Where, to use a basketball analogy, we're not playing half court, type of game right now, right? We're playing real fast. And if you're not in shape to play fast and to play up tempo, then you're going to be out of the game and you're going to be on the bench.
That's fantastic. So we're a little bit over time, but I'm going to be greedy, and I just want to make sure that if there's anything else that either of you think that a student in a sociology or a sport management class should know about this before we sign off. Just any last words?
Well, it was greed. It was intellectual greed, Doc Montez. So you're good. Well, sport management students, I would tell them, a few things. I would tell them to read what Michael Eric Dyson, the noted professor, told me, read broadly as you can. I would tell them to develop skill sets that can help us all out in this environment, that they need to still value diversity, equity, inclusion, regardless of what we call it. And Doc Coakley and I have had great conversations. So it's nice to see, like, freedom is being pushed now, human dignity. And I'm like, well, this is great. I mean, I'm all for this other language and in lyrical and lexicon and things we're using. I would tell the students, if they want to become any of us, to get a broader degree, which everyone on the call has, higher ed or soc, than to be narrow. Because, Doc Como and I laugh, we've both been on sport management faculty and we've been on higher ed faculty, but you can't flip the two. So I'm not knocking if you want to get a PhD or terminal degree in sport management, but if you look at, how the four of us ended up on this podcast, I think there's lessons there. So they need to position themselves broadly, know that all these problems and challenges are opportunity to be involved. And I don't want to use the word fix, and just be solution oriented. We need help, everyone in this village. Let's not forget about youth sport, high school sport, community college. And I want to end with this. I have a picture somewhere over here in 5th grade. We won the district in flag football at Gardena Elementary. We had three women on the team, 2 of the starters, in the spirit of breaking racial stacking in 1977, 78. I played center as an African-American, and Lawrence Ham is Korean, ended up getting a volleyball scholarship to USC, could make this up. And we just beat the socks off everyone. I'm bringing that up because look how huge my optimism flag football is. At Trey's senior awards, one of his homies, good friends, she's going to Arizona as a linebacker on a full ride to play flag football. And so I would tell the students to look for new lanes to add value as a leader, as a sport administrator, because one of my side hustles, I'm going to coach the centers in flag football. I played it since 5th grade through all the way to college. So that's what I want sport management students, and that you need to work hard and pay your dues.
I think the reality is that these are the students who are going to be our problem solvers. So whether we like it or not, they're going to be the solution. Now, that said, my advice is that don't be entitled. Nobody owes you anything. Understand what a true work ethic is. Respect the person that you see either in the classroom or virtually. You have to have a level of respect for that person. And you have to get beyond paradigm paralysis. What I mean by that is approaching things the same way. And you've heard from your friend that, oh, okay, this is the blueprint for success. No. To Dr. Harrison's point, you have to find new spaces, new lanes, new opportunities for you to be successful. And we're not going to spoon feed you. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Okay. And nor should we lie to you about how good you are, because in most cases, you're not as good as you think that you are. Okay. The problem is that the structure now is that we have to ride that fine line between not telling them that they're not as good as they are, but then also empowering them to be better. And then for them to take that and interpret that and to be able to be thriving students. That's the true talent. That's the true challenge here. So that would be my advice to this next generation. I think it's replete with opportunity. But it comes with a lot of, I guess, self-identity and self-assessment and self-awareness about who these students are and where they. I'll just leave it at that.
I'm going to be super quick. I want them to know they are drinking from wells. I'm quoting Troy Vincent just said this. We were around James Shack Harris, Jimmy Ray, people from Doc Coakley's era. And I mean that in a very endearing way. John Wooten and others that have, you sport management students are drinking from wells that you didn't dig. So show deference to those coming behind you and, look at the relationship between these two professors. Dr. J, Dr. Jeff, I mean, he's bringing him in on the book. The most cited, the number one book, global languages, sports. What's sport in society? I think it's sports in society. I say it right, Dr. Cole? I mean, it's sports. Okay. Want to make sure I'm on point.
But Dr. Harrison, to your point, respect the well that you're drinking from.
Thank you, Doc. Yeah.
Don't go to 10 different wells and then you're trying to get a quick fix. Respect the well that you're drinking from.
I love it.
Let's start with that.
And where I'll end is, I remember Jamel Hill wrote an article. She's the adjunct for us. She wrote an article when she was at ESPN. I have the book right to my left called The Trophy Kids. That was a label placed on the millennial generation, which came after us. At Rosecrans Park, we had 10 teams in Little League. If you didn't come in first through third, you didn't get a tiered trophy. You got a spaghetti dinner with Mr. Blakely, one of the friends of Doc Martin's father, and you might get a certificate if you were lucky that thank you for participating. But I'll end with this. This is more humor, I used to be the Grinch of being critical of the generations. And so I'm just so filled with joy to see Dr. Martin and his challenge to the future generations that we are on you, so to speak, culturally, because we want you all to make it better. We want you to be more resilient. We don't want you to run the HR every time you're uncomfortable. If someone is legitimately harassing you, mental health, physical health, absolutely. But because your person you report to is challenging you, that's no reason to, run and tell. So I know we went over, but we believe in the next generation, but you're just going to have to realize that we're all not going to get out of the way because y'all want our jobs.
Critical thinking and accountability is not a crime against humanity at all. Okay. And so I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation to be able to think critically and to be held accountable. Those two things I think are absolutely paramount to the success of this new generation.
Thank you so much for dropping all of this deep knowledge on us, on the students that are listening. For students that are listening, what are your thoughts about this? If you're interested, you want to join in the conversation, jump on our Discord server, the Sports and Society Discord server. A link to that is going to be in the description of this episode. I can't thank you too so enough for being here, for sharing, and even more so for the work that you do every single day.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you, Jeff, but I want to thank all three of you for the work that you do, respective to our students. In most cases, you guys are the front line of learning, of opportunity, of growth, and all of you in your respective ways have left a meaningful contribution to higher education. I just want to thank all three of you for that.
And I'll be 15 seconds. Thank you both. You both mean a lot to me. J51, K51, we both were 51. I think away, Doc Copley was 51 back in the day, 50 at home. I got a great shot of him doing one of these Dr. J-ish type layups at Regis. So shout out to D3 student athletes, D2, D1, Doc Martin played 9 games with the Clippers. He wouldn't tell you that, but I'm going to brag on him a little bit. And we're just glad to be here, and sport has given us so much, but education has given us more.